A nation stood in silence under a sky that had not given rain for years, while one man stepped forward to challenge everything they had come to accept as truth. Welcome tonight. We will follow, step by step, what happened on Mount Carmel during the confrontation between Elisha and the prophets of Baal, as recorded in the biblical account found in 1 Kings. This is not a symbolic retelling or a poetic interpretation. We will move through the sequence exactly as it unfolds, tracking the decisions, the actions, and the direct consequences that led to one of the most public and decisive confrontations in the text. At this point in history, the kingdom of Israel was not in a neutral state, under the rule of King Ahab, and through the influence of Jezebel. The nation had shifted away from its previous foundation and adopted the worship of Baal. This change was not limited to private belief or isolated practice. It had become institutional, affecting leadership, public identity, and the direction of the entire nation. This matters because the confrontation that takes place on Mount Carmel is not simply a disagreement between individuals. It is a direct challenge between two systems of authority, observed at a national level. At the same time, the land itself was under pressure. A prolonged drought had already been declared, and its effects were visible and unavoidable. Water sources had diminished, agriculture had failed, and survival conditions were becoming increasingly difficult. This was not a coincidence or an unexplained event. The drought had been announced earlier by Elijah, establishing a direct connection between the condition of the land and the authority behind his message. This matters because the environment itself becomes part of the confrontation, reinforcing that what is about to happen is not theoretical, it is tied to real, measurable conditions. We will begin with the conditions that led to this moment, including the drought and the interaction between Elisha and King Ahab. Then we will move to the gathering on Mount Carmel, where the people of Israel are brought together to observe what happens next. From there, we will follow the preparation of the altars, the actions taken by the prophets of Baal, and the sequence that leads to Elijah's response. Finally, we will examine the moment when fire falls, and what happens immediately after that event. The central question guiding this sequence is direct and measurable. Which authority would respond, and what would that response reveal in front of everyone present? Before we continue, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And as you listen, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. And also, if you had been standing among the people that day, after years without rain, what would you have expected to happen? Now, we begin with the condition of the land and the reason this confrontation could no longer be avoided. At the beginning of this sequence, the land of Israel was already under a prolonged drought. This was not presented as a natural cycle or seasonal variation. The absence of rain had been declared earlier by Elisha, stating that there would be no dew or rain except at his word. This matters because it establishes a direct connection between the condition of the land and the authority behind the message Elijah represents. The drought is not simply background. Context is part of the unfolding sequence. Over time, the effects became visible at every level. Water sources diminished, vegetation failed, and the ability to sustain livestock and agriculture was severely reduced. This created pressure not only on individuals, but across the entire structure of the kingdom. The situation could not be ignored or explained away. This matters because it forces attention. The longer the drought continues, the more it demands an answer. At the same time, the leadership of the nation had shifted its alignment. Under King Ahab, and through the influence of Jezebel, the worship of Baal had been established as a dominant practice. This was not a minor adjustment or a private preference. It affected national identity, public rituals, and the direction of leadership. Prophets associated with Baal were supported and maintained within the royal structure, while those aligned with the previous authority were marginalized or removed. This matters because it defines the environment in which Elijah is operating. He is not speaking from a position of institutional support, but from outside the dominant system. Baal was associated with fertility, rain, and agricultural productivity. This detail is critical. The drought directly challenges the claimed domain of Baal's authority. If Baal is responsible for rain and fertility, then the continued absence of rain raises a direct question about that authority. This matters because the condition of the land is not neutral. It becomes evidence within the conflict. During this period, Elijah is not continuously present in the public space. He is directed to specific locations, including a brook and later a household outside the main region, where he remains until the next instruction is given. This matters because it shows that the sequence is controlled. Elijah does not act independently or randomly. His movements and appearances are tied to instruction, reinforcing the idea that the events are unfolding in a defined order. As the drought continues into its later stages, the pressure reaches a point where action is required. The land cannot sustain the existing conditions indefinitely. It is at this point that Elisha is instructed to present himself to King Ahab. This is a direct transition from absence to confrontation. The timing matters because it occurs when the effects of the drought are fully established and cannot be denied. At this stage, the conditions are set, the land is under stress, the leadership is aligned with a different authority, and the absence of rain has created a situation that demands resolution. The question is no longer whether there is a problem, it is who has the authority to address it, and that question will now be brought directly to the king. When Elijah presents himself, the confrontation begins immediately. There is no delay, no gradual introduction. King Ahab sees Elijah and identifies him as the one who has brought trouble to Israel. This accusation is direct and reflects the perspective of the leadership. From Ahab's position, the drought is the result of Elijah's declaration, and therefore Elijah is responsible for the condition of the land. This matters because it frames the conflict from the beginning. Responsibility is being assigned, but the basis of that assignment is about to be challenged. Elijah responds by rejecting the accusation and redirecting it. He states that the trouble does not come from his presence, but from Ahab's actions specifically, abandoning the commands that previously defined the nation and aligning with Baal. This response is not emotional or defensive. It is structured and precise, identifying the cause of the problem as a shift in authority and practice. This matters because it moves the discussion away from personal blame and into a broader issue of alignment. At this point, Elijah does not continue with the argument. Instead, he issues a direct instruction. Ahab is told to gather all Israel at Mount Carmel, along with the prophets of Baal and the prophets associated with Ash. This is not a private meeting or a limited discussion. It is a public assembly. The scale of the gathering matters because it ensures that what follows will be witnessed, not debated afterward. The outcome will not depend on interpretation, it will be observed directly. Mount Carmel is chosen as the location, and this choice is significant. It is a place that allows for visibility and access, suitable for a large gathering. This matters because the confrontation is designed to be seen by the people, not hidden within the structures of leadership. The presence of the prophets of Baal, supported by the royal system, contrasts with Elisha standing alone. This imbalance in numbers is intentional. It establishes a visible difference in representation before any action is taken. When the people are gathered, Elijah addresses them directly. He presents a clear question. How long will they continue between two positions? If one authority is true, then it should be followed. If the other is true, then that should be followed instead. The question is not abstracted. It demands a decision. This matters because it removes neutrality. The people are no longer observers without responsibility. They are being called to recognize alignment. The response from the people is silence. They do not answer. This detail is critical. It shows that the issue is not lack of awareness, but lack of decision. The silence reflects uncertainty or unwillingness to commit. This matters because it defines the condition of the nation at that moment. They are present, they are aware, but they have not chosen. Elijah then defines the terms of what will happen next. Two offerings will be prepared, one by the prophets of Baal and one by himself. No fire will be applied. Instead, Each side will call upon their authority, and the one who responds with fire will be recognized. This structure is clear and measurable. It removes ambiguity. The outcome will not depend on argument or persuasion, but on direct response. At this point, the confrontation is fully established. The location is set. The participants are gathered, and the terms are defined. The next step is not discussion. It is temons, with the people gathered, the terms established, and the question of authority clearly defined. The sequence moves from setup into execution. Elijah does not begin with his own offering. Instead, he gives the prophets of Baal the first opportunity. This decision is intentional. It allows them to act without interruption and removes any claim that they were rushed or restricted. This matters because it establishes fairness in the process. The outcome will not be influenced by order or limitation. It will depend entirely on response. The prophets of Baal accept the terms and begin by preparing their offering. They take a bull, cut it into pieces, and arrange it on the wood of the altar. These actions follow a recognizable structure of sacrifice. There is nothing unusual in the preparation itself. This matters because it confirms that the process is not being altered or manipulated. The only difference lies in what will follow, whether or not fire will come in response. Once the preparation is complete, they begin to call upon the name of Baal. The call is direct and repeated. They ask for an answer. The expectation is clear. If Baal holds authority over rain, fertility, and the natural order, then this moment provides an opportunity to demonstrate that authority in a visible and undeniable way. This matters because the test is aligned with what Baal has claimed to control. The calling continues from morning until midday. This duration is important. It shows that the prophets are not making a brief or symbolic attempt. They are persistent, repeating their calls and maintaining the action over an extended period. This matters because it removes any suggestion that the lack of response could be due to insufficient effort. The process is sustained and deliberate. During this time, the prophets also engage in physical movement around the altar. They leap and move in a way that is associated with their ritual practice. This is not random behavior. It is part of their method of calling upon their authority. The combination of verbal repetition and physical action reflects a complete engagement in the process. This matters because it demonstrates that they are using the full extent of their known practices. Despite this, there is no response. The text is clear and specific. No voice is heard. No answer is given, and no attention is received. This absence is not described as delayed or partially discomplete. This matters because it defines the outcome of the first phase. The expectation was direct response, but the result is silence. At midday, Elijah addresses the situation, but not by interrupting the process. Instead, he speaks in a way that highlights the lack of response. He suggests possible explanations. Perhaps Baal is occupied, traveling, or unable to hear. These statements are not presented as genuine possibilities, but as a way of drawing attention to the silence that has continued despite extended effort. This matters because it reinforces what is already evident without altering the structure of the test. In response to this, the prophets intensify their actions. Their calling becomes louder, and they begin to cut themselves with swords and lances, following their custom. Blood flows as part of this process. This escalation is significant. It shows that when the expected response does not occur, they increase the intensity of their actions. This matters because it demonstrates that the lack of response is not due to lack of effort. It persists, even as effort increases. The sequence continues into the afternoon, extending beyond the initial period of calling. The prophets remain engaged, repeating their actions and maintaining their expectation of response. However, the outcome does not change. There is still no voice, no answer, and no reaction. At this point, the first phase of the demonstration has reached its conclusion. The process has been completed. The effort has been sustained, and the result is silence. As the afternoon advances and the prophets of Baal continue their efforts. The sequence reaches a point where intensity replaces expectation. What began as structured calling now becomes sustained escalation. Their voices grow louder, their movements more aggressive, and their actions more extreme. Yet the pattern remains unchanged. There is still no response. This matters because it shows that the process has moved beyond normal ritual practice into heightened desperation. While the outcome continues to remain exactly the same, the prophets begin to cut themselves with swords and lances, following their custom until blood flows. This action is not introduced casually. It is presented as a deliberate escalation within their ritual system. The expectation behind it is clear. Greater intensity is believed to produce a greater response. This matters because it reveals how their system operates under pressure. When results are not achieved, the solution is not reevaluation, but amplification of effort. The duration of this process extends beyond midday into the later part of the day. Time becomes a critical factor. The longer the silence continues, the more visible it becomes to those watching. The people of Israel are not removed from this moment. They are present, observing everything that is happening. This matters because the demonstration is not taking place in isolation. The absence of response is being witnessed collectively, turning what could have been dismissed privately into something that cannot be ignored publicly. Throughout this extended period, there is still no voice, no answer, and no sign of attention. The text emphasizes this repeatedly, not as a stylistic choice, but as a factual observation. The repetition matters because it removes ambiguity. The lack of response is not partial, delayed, or unclear. It is complete and continuous, even as effort increases. And time passed. At this stage, the structure of the demonstration has already provided a measurable result. The prophets of Baal have prepared their offering correctly, called upon their authority persistently, intensified their actions, and extended their efforts over time. Every variable within their control has been applied. This matters because it establishes that the outcome is not due to missing steps or incomplete execution. The process has been fully carried out, yet the expected response has not occurred. The presence of Elijah during this phase is also important. He does not interfere with their process or attempt to shorten it. By allowing the sequence to continue to its natural conclusion, he ensures that the result is fully established before moving forward. This matters because it prevents any claim that the process was interrupted prematurely. The silence is allowed to define itself completely. As the day moves forward and the prophets continue without result, the demonstration reaches a point where continuation no longer produces new information. The pattern has been confirmed. Effort has been sustained, intensity has increased, time has passed, and the outcome has remained unchanged. This creates a clear transition point within the sequence. At this moment, the focus is no longer on what the prophets of Baal might still attempt, but on what will happen next. The first side of the demonstration has completed its role, not through success, but through the absence of response under fully applied conditions. And now, with the result established and witnessed by all, the sequence prepares to shift. The next step will not involve escalation. It will introduce a direct contrast with the prolonged silence fully established and witnessed by everyone present. The sequence reaches a decisive transition point. The prophets of Baal have completed their process under sustained effort, increased intensity, and extended duration, yet no response has occurred. At this stage, the absence of result is no longer a temporary condition. It has become the defining outcome of their demonstration. This matters because it creates the conditions for a shift in control. The focus now moves away from what has failed and toward what will be presented next. Elijah steps forward, but he does not begin immediately with action. Instead, he first addresses the people and calls them to come closer. This detail is important because it changes the positioning of those observing. The people are no longer at a distance, passively watching what has already taken place. They are brought near, into a position where what follows can be clearly seen. This matters because the next phase of the sequence is intended to be observed in detail, without obstruction or uncertainty. The first action Elijah takes is not to build something new, but to repair what already existed. He takes the altar that had been associated with the previous authority and restores it. The altar had been broken down, indicating neglect or abandonment over time. By repairing it, Elisha is not introducing a new structure, but re-establishing one that had already been defined. This matters because it connects the upcoming demonstration to an existing foundation rather than creating something unfamiliar. As he rebuilds the altar, Elijah uses 12 stones, each representing one of the tribes of Israel. This detail is deliberate and structured. It references the original identity of the nation as a unified whole, even though at this point the kingdom is divided. This matters because it reinforces continuity. The demonstration is not limited to a segment of the people. It is presented in relation to the full identity of the nation. After the altar is restored, Elisha arranges the wood and prepares the bull, in the same way the prophets of Baal had done earlier. This parallel is important. The preparation follows the same basic structure, ensuring that the difference in outcome cannot be attributed to a difference in setup. Both sides use comparable methods of preparation. This matters because it maintains consistency in the demonstration, allowing the focus to remain entirely on response rather than process. At this point, Elijah introduces an additional element that had not been present before. He instructs that water be poured over the offering and the wood. This section is repeated multiple times until the altar, the offering, and even the surrounding trench are saturated. The presence of water is significant, especially within the context of a prolonged drought. Water is scarce, yet it is used here deliberately. This matters because it removes any possibility that what follows could be attributed to natural ignition or hidden fire. The conditions are being made more difficult, not easier. The trench around the altar becomes filled with water, and the entire structure is visibly soaked. This is not a symbolic gesture, it is a practical condition that directly affects what is about to happen. The preparation now differs from the earlier attempt, not in structure, but in added constraint. This matters because it further isolates the variable being tested. If fire appears under these conditions, it cannot be explained through ordinary means. At this stage, the transition is complete. The silence of the first phase has been established. The people have been repositioned. The altar has been restored, and the offering has been prepared under controlled and observable conditions. Every step has been deliberate, ensuring that the next action will be clearly understood by those watching. The sequence is no longer focused on absence. It is now positioned for a direct response. With the altar restored, the offering prepared, and the entire structure saturated with water, the sequence reaches its decisive moment. Every visible variable has been addressed. The people are positioned close enough to observe clearly. The preparation mirrors what was done previously, and the added presence of water removes any possibility of natural ignition. This matters because the conditions are now fully controlled. What happens next will not depend on effort, repetition, or escalation, but on response. At this point, Elijah does not begin with extended ritual or prolonged action. Instead, he approaches and delivers a single, structured prayer. The content of this prayer is precise and intentional. He addresses the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, establishing continuity with the original foundation of the nation. This is not a new authority being introduced, but a reference to what had already been established. This matters because it connects the moment directly to prior identity and covenant, rather than presenting something unfamiliar. Within the prayer, Elisha makes a clear request that it be known that God is present, that Elisha is acting according to instruction, and that the people may recognize and return. The focus is not on display or personal validation. The request is centered on recognition and confirmation. This matters because it defines the purpose of the demonstration. The goal is not to create spectacle, but to produce a clear and observable outcome that identifies authority. The length of the prayer is also significant. It is not extended over time, nor is it repeated. Unlike the prolonged and intensified calling of the prophets of Baal, this is a single moment of communication. This contrast matters because it removes duration and repetition as factors. The response if it occurs, will not be the result of accumulated effort. Immediately following the prayer, the response occurs. Fire falls and consumes the offering, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. The description is comprehensive. The fire does not stop at the expected elements, it extends beyond them, removing everything associated with the altar. This matters because it confirms total response. Nothing remains partially affected or untouched. The outcome is complete and visible. The presence of water, which had been introduced as a limiting factor, is also removed. This detail reinforces that the response is not constrained by conditions that would normally prevent combustion. The entire structure is consumed under circumstances where ignition would not naturally occur. This matters because it eliminates alternative explanations. The result cannot be attributed to hidden fire, residual heat, or environmental factors. The reaction of the people follows immediately. They fall on their faces and acknowledge that the authority demonstrated is real. This response is direct and collective. The same group that had remained silent earlier now responds with clarity. This matters because it shows that the demonstration has produced the intended effect. The question that had been posed earlier, who holds authority, has now been answered in a way that does not require interpretation. At this point, the sequence has moved from prolonged silence to immediate response, from sustained effort to a single action, and from uncertainty to clear recognition. The contrast between the two demonstrations is fully established, not through argument, but through observable outcome. The confrontation that began with a question has now reached its answer, and what follows will not be another test. It will be the consequence of what has just been revealed. But with the demonstration completed and the response clearly established in front of the people, the sequence moves immediately into consequence. There is no pause, no transition into reflection or discussion. The recognition that follows the fire is direct, but it is not presented as the final step. Instead, it leads directly into action. This matters because the demonstration was not intended to end with acknowledgement alone. It was meant to produce a result that would be followed by a response. As the people fall on their faces and declare that the authority demonstrated is real, Elijah gives a command without delay. He instructs that the prophets of Baal be seized and that none of them be allowed to escape. This instruction is direct and specific. It is not framed as a suggestion or a symbolic act. It is an immediate action that follows the demonstration. This matters because it shows that recognition alone is not sufficient within the structure of the sequence. Alignment is expected to be reflected in action. The people respond to this instruction and seize the prophets. The same group that had remained silent earlier now participates in carrying out the command. This shift is significant. Their role changes from observers to participants. This matters because it shows that the demonstration has altered not only perception, but behavior. The result is not limited to internal acknowledgement, it produces external response. The prophets are then taken down to the brook Kishon. The movement from the elevated position of Mount Carmel to a lower location introduces a physical transition within the sequence. This matters because it separates the place of demonstration from the place of consequence. The events are connected, but they occur in distinct locations, reinforcing that each stage has its own function. At the brook, the prophets are executed. The description is brief and direct, without elaboration or symbolic language. This action represents the removal of those who had been central to the opposing system. This matters because it marks the end of their role within the sequence. The system they represented has already failed in demonstration, and now its active presence is removed. This step is critical in understanding the progression of events. The confrontation was not designed to exist alongside continued opposition in its previous form. Once the authority had been demonstrated and recognized, the structure supporting the opposing system is addressed directly. This matters because it shows that the sequence is not incomplete. It moves from demonstration to resolution within the same framework. At this point, the prophets of Baal, who had been supported by the leadership admitted as part of the national structure, are no longer present. Their removal changes the environment in which the next phase will occur. The system that had been challenged is not only exposed, it is dismantled. The sequence now transitions again, but this time the focus returns to the original condition that set everything in motion. The drought has not yet ended, and what follows will determine whether that condition will change. With the prophets of Baal removed and the opposing structure dismantled, the sequence shifts back to the original condition that made the confrontation necessary. The drought, which had been present from the beginning and had shaped the entire context of the event, has not yet changed. The land is still without rain, and the pressure that affected the nation remains in place. This matters because the demonstration on Mount Carmel, while decisive in establishing authority, has not yet resolved the environmental condition that initiated the sequence. At this point, Elijah turns his attention to King Ahab. This transition is important because Ahab represents the leadership structure that had previously supported the system now removed. Elijah instructs him to go, eat, and drink, stating that there is the sound of heavy rain. This statement is significant because the rain has not yet appeared. There are no visible clouds, no immediate change in the sky, and no physical evidence that the condition of the land has shifted. This matters because the declaration is made before the observable result, establishing that the next phase will follow the same pattern as before announcement, followed by outcome. Ahab responds by going to eat and drink, following the instruction given. This action is simple but important. It shows compliance without argument or delay. Earlier in the sequence, Ahab had identified Elijah as the source of trouble, but at this point, he follows the directive without resistance. This matters because it reflects a shift in behavior following the events on Mount Carmel. The demonstration has already established authority, and the response now aligns with that recognition. While Ahab moves to eat and drink, Elijah does not remain in the same position. Instead, he goes up to the top of Mount Carmel and positions himself differently. He bends down toward the ground, placing his face between his knees. This posture is specific and intentional. It is not described as part of a ritual sequence or a public display. It is a private action that marks the beginning of the next phase. This matters because it contrasts with the earlier public demonstration. The confrontation required visibility, but what follows begins in a more controlled and focused manner. Elijah then instructs his servant to go and look toward the sea. This introduces a new element: observation. Unlike the earlier phase, where the response was immediate and visible to all, the change that is about to occur will develop over time and must be monitored. The servant goes to look and returns with a report. There is nothing. This first report is important because it confirms that at this stage there is still no visible change in the environment. Elijah does not alter his position or adjust his instruction. Instead, he tells the servant to go again. This process repeats multiple times. Each time, the servant goes, looks, and returns with the same answer: there is nothing. This repetition matters because it introduces persistence into the sequence. Unlike the earlier demonstration, where the response was immediate, this phase unfolds gradually, requiring continued attention and expectation without immediate visible result. The distinction between the two phases is clear. On Mount Carmel, the response came instantly following a single action. Here, the process involves repetition, observation, and waiting. This matters because it shows that the sequence does not follow a single pattern. Different stages unfold in different ways, even though they are part of the same overall progression. At this point, the condition of the land has not yet visibly changed, but the process that will lead to that change has begun. The declaration has been made, the posture has been established, and the observation is underway. The sky is still clear, but the sequence is already moving forward, and the next report will not remain the same. As the process of observation continues and the servant is sent repeatedly to look toward the sea, the sequence reaches a turning point. The previous reports had all been identical. There was nothing visible, no indication that the condition of the sky had changed. This repetition established a pattern of expectation without result, reinforcing that the shift would not be immediate. However, On the seventh time, the report changes. The servant returns and states that a small cloud is visible, rising from the sea, about the size of a man's hand. This detail is precise and limited in scale, indicating that the change is present but not yet significant in appearance. The size of the cloud matters because it contrasts sharply with the declaration that had been made earlier about the sound of heavy rain. At this stage, there is no visible evidence that would suggest an approaching storm. The cloud is small, isolated, and easily overlooked in normal conditions. This matters because it shows that the sequence does not move from absence directly to full manifestation. Instead, it begins with a minimal sign that indicates the direction of what is about to happen. When Elijah receives this report, he responds immediately. There is no delay or request for further confirmation. He instructs that Ahab be told to prepare his chariot and leave before the rain prevents him. This instruction is based entirely on the presence of the small cloud, not on a fully developed change in the environment. This matters because it shows that the transition point has been reached. The process has moved from waiting to action, even though the visible conditions have only just begun to change. At these moments, the sequence begins to accelerate. The sky, which had remained clear for an extended period, starts to shift. Clouds gather, the wind increases, and the atmosphere changes rapidly. The small initial sign expands into a developing storm. This progression is not described as gradual over a long period. Instead, once the change begins, it advances quickly. This matters because it contrasts with the earlier phase of repeated observation without visible results. The delay is followed by rapid development. Rain begins to fall, ending the drought that had defined the entire context of the sequence. This outcome connects directly back to the original declaration made by Elijah. The absence of rain had been established through his word, and now the return of rain follows the same authority. This matters because it completes the cycle that began before the confrontation. The condition that created pressure and required resolution has now been addressed. Ahab rides away in his chariot toward Jezreel as the rain intensifies. This movement is practical and immediate. The instruction to leave before the storm becomes too strong is now being fulfilled. This matters because it shows that the sequence is not only symbolic or declarative, it affects real conditions and requires real responses. At this point, the environment has shifted completely. What had been dry and unproductive is now being restored through rainfall. The drought, which had served as the starting condition and the central pressure point, has come to an end. The sequence has moved from absence to fulfillment, and what follows will not return to the same condition. It will show the immediate result of this change. With the rain now falling and the drought brought to an end, the sequence moves into its immediate aftermath. The condition that defined the entire setup, prolonged absence of rain, has been reversed. However, the conclusion of the drought does not represent the end of the sequence. Instead, it introduces a shift in momentum that affects both the environment and the individuals involved. This matters because the events that have taken place do not remain isolated. They produce movement and consequence that extend beyond the mountain. As the rain intensifies, Ahab travels toward Jezreel in his chariot. This movement follows directly from the earlier instruction given by Elijah to leave before the storm becomes too strong. The rain, which began as a small sign, has now developed into a condition that affects travel and visibility. This matters because it shows that the sequence has moved from controlled demonstration into natural consequence. What was initiated on Mount Carmel now extends into the broader landscape. At the same time, Elijah's role does not end with the return of rain. The text describes that the power of the Lord comes upon him, and he moves ahead of Ahab, running before the chariot all the way to Jezreel. This action is not introduced as a symbolic gesture. It is a physical movement that demonstrates continuation rather than conclusion. This matters because it shows that Elijah remains active within the sequence. The authority that was demonstrated on the mountain continues to be present in what follows. The contrast between Ahab and Elijah is also significant in this moment. Ahab travels in a chariot, following the established route toward the city, while Elijah runs ahead of him. This difference highlights two forms of movement within the same sequence. One follows the expected structure of leadership and position, while the other reflects direct empowerment tied to the events that have just occurred. This matters because it reinforces the distinction that has been present throughout the entire confrontation. The arrival to Jezreel introduces the next stage of the narrative, where the consequences of what has taken place on Mount Carmel will begin to affect the broader political and personal environment. Up to this point, the focus has been on demonstration, response, and environmental change. Now, the impact begins to move into the structures of leadership and influence. This matters because it shows that the sequence is not isolated to a single event. It continues to unfold beyond the mountain. At Tista, the confrontation on Mount Carmel has reached its resolution. The authority has been demonstrated, the opposing system has been removed, and the drought has ended. Each of these elements connects directly to the structure established at the beginning. The question that was presented has been answered through observable outcome, and the condition that created pressure has been addressed. However, the sequence does not conclude with stillness. The movement toward Jezreel signals continuation. The effects of what has taken place will carry forward into the next phase, where response from those in power will determine what happens next. The fire has fallen, the rain has returned, and now, the consequences will continue to unfold beyond the mountain. With the events on Mount Carmel completed and the rain returning to the land, the sequence shifts from demonstration and consequence into reaction. What took place on the mountain was public and decisive, witnessed by the people and carried out under direct observation. However, the impact of those events does not remain limited to that location. It extends into the structures of power, beginning with the royal household. This matters because the outcome of the confrontation will now be tested within leadership, where previous alignment had already been established. When Ahab arrives in Jezreel, he reports everything that had happened. The account includes the demonstration on Mount Carmel, the failure of the prophets of Baal, the response that followed, and their removal. This report is direct and comprehensive. It is not presented as interpretation or opinion. It is a recounting of observable events. This matters because the reaction that follows is based on confirmed information, not uncertainty. Jezebel receives this report, and her response is immediate. There is no indication of hesitation, reflection, or reassessment of position. Instead, she sends a message directly to Elijah. The content of the message is clear and specific. She declares that within a set period, Elijah's life will be taken in the same way as the prophets who were executed. This is not a general expression of anger. It is a defined threat with a time frame attached. This matters because it introduces urgency and shifts the direction of the sequence. The reaction of Jezebel is significant in contrast to what occurred on Mount Carmel. The demonstration had produced recognition among the people, but it does not produce the same response within leadership. This matters because it shows that the outcome of the confrontation does not result in uniform alignment. Different individuals respond differently, even when presented with the same evidence. The authority structure that had supported Baal worship has not yet fully shifted. Even after the events on the mountain, Jezebel's response demonstrates that opposition is still active and capable of initiating action. This matters because it prevents the sequence from ending in resolution at this stage. Instead, it introduces a new phase where the consequences of the confrontation will continue to unfold. When Elijah receives the message, his response is immediate. He does not remain in Jezreel or attempt to confront the threat directly. Instead, he leaves and travels away from the immediate area. This movement marks a sudden change in direction. Up to this point, Elijah had moved toward confrontation, presenting himself publicly and acting within the center of the conflict. Now, he moves away from that position. This matters because it introduces a reversal in his trajectory. The sequence transitions from public demonstration to personal response. The focus narrows from national confrontation to individual experience. This shift is important because it shows that the events do not conclude with external outcomes alone. They also produce internal and personal effects that will now become part of the progression. At this point, the momentum that carried the sequence forward through Mount Carmel encounters resistance within leadership. The confrontation has been resolved in one setting, but it continues in another. The next phase will not take place on a mountain. It will unfold in isolation. After receiving the direct threat from Jezebel, Elijah's movement away from Jezreel continues without delay. This is not a gradual withdrawal or a strategic repositioning within the same region. It is a decisive departure that increases in distance as the sequence unfolds. This matters because it marks a clear transition from public confrontation to personal withdrawal. The same figure who stood alone before hundreds on Mount Carmel is now moving away from the center of activity into isolation. Elijah travels south and eventually reaches Beersheba, which lies at the edge of the territory associated with Judah. This location is significant because it represents a boundary point. Moving to Beersheba places Elijah at the limit of the region, away from the immediate influence of Ahab and Jezebel. This matters because it shows that the movement is not temporary or local. It is directed toward distance and separation. At this point, Elisha leaves his servant behind. This detail introduces a further level of isolation. Up to now, even when acting alone in confrontation, Elijah was not completely without support. The presence of a servant provided a minimal connection to assistance and communication. By leaving the servant, Elijah removes that connection. This matters because it shows that the sequence is narrowing its focus even further, moving toward a condition where Elijah is completely alone. From there, Elijah continues into the wilderness, traveling a day's journey beyond Beersheba. The wilderness setting is important because it contrasts sharply with the structured environment of Mount Carmel and the populated areas of the kingdom. It is a place without audience, without public visibility, and without immediate resources. This matters because it shifts the conditions of the sequence from observable events to internal experience. When Elijah stops, he sits down under a broom tree. This is a simple action, but it marks the point where movement pauses. Up to this moment, the sequence has been defined by action, confrontation, demonstration, response, and travel. Now, there is stillness. This matters because it creates space for a different type of development, one that is not driven by external events. At this point, Elijah expresses a desire that had not appeared earlier in the sequence. He states that it is enough and asks that his life be taken. This statement is direct and personal. It does not reflect the public authority or confidence that was evident on Mount Carmel. Instead, it reveals a condition that contrasts with the earlier phase. This matters because it shows that the sequence includes both external authority and internal struggle. The events that have taken place have not removed the personal impact on the individual involved. Elijah then lies down and falls asleep under the tree. This action introduces rest, but not as recovery within a stable environment. It occurs within the wilderness, following a declaration of exhaustion and withdrawal. This matters because it shows that the sequence has reached a point where continuation requires a different form of intervention. The transition from Mount Carmel to the wilderness is complete. The environment has changed. The presence of others has been removed, and the focus has shifted from public demonstration to personal condition. The threat that initiated this movement has led not to immediate confrontation, but to distance and isolation. At this stage, the sequence is no longer driven by visible conflict. It has moved into a quieter setting, and what follows will not begin with action. It will begin with intervention. With Elijah now in the wilderness, removed from the public setting and physically separated from both allies and opposition, the sequence shifts into a phase that is no longer driven by confrontation or external pressure. The immediate threat from Jezebel has caused movement, but it has not resolved the condition that Elijah expressed when he stopped under the tree. At this point, the progression is no longer defined by visible events, but by what happens in response to a state of exhaustion and withdrawal. This matters because the sequence introduces a form of intervention that does not come through public demonstration, but through direct provision. As Elijah lies asleep under the tree, He is awakened by the presence of an angel who touches him and instructs him to get up and eat. This interaction is direct and simple, without extended explanation. When Elijah looks, he finds food and water, prepared bread baked over hot coals, and a jar of water placed near him. The provision is specific and immediate, addressing basic physical need. This matters because it shows that the intervention does not begin with instruction or correction, but with restoration of strength. Elijah eats and drinks, then lies down again. The sequence does not rush forward after the first interaction. Instead, it allows for repetition. The angel returns a second time, touches him again, and repeats the instruction to get up and eat, adding that the journey ahead will be too much for him otherwise. This second interaction is important because it introduces direction. The first provision addresses immediate condition. The second connects that provision to what will follow. This matters because it shows that the restoration is not an end in itself. It prepares Elijah for continued movement. After this, Elijah gets up, eats, and drinks again. And the text describes that he travels for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. The duration and distance of this journey are significant. It is not a short relocation or a nearby destination. It is an extended movement that requires sustained endurance. This matters because it shows that the intervention has enabled continuation, but the process still requires time and progression. The destination Horeb carries importance within the broader context. It is associated with prior foundational events, particularly those connected to the establishment of covenant and law. This matters because the sequence is not moving Elijah to an unknown or neutral location. It is directing him toward a place that has already been associated with defining moments of authority and instruction. When Elijah arrives, he enters a cave and spends the night there. This setting continues the pattern of isolation. Even at the destination, the environment is not one of public gathering or visible activity. It remains enclosed and separated. This matters because the sequence has not yet returned to public action. It is still focused on what occurs in a controlled and isolated context. At this point, the question is presented to Elijah. What are you doing here? The question is direct and requires response. It is not framed as accusation or instruction, but as inquiry. Elijah responds by describing his situation as alignment with the previous authority, the actions taken against that authority, and his perception that he is the only one remaining. This response reflects his internal understanding of the situation, not necessarily the complete condition of the environment. This matters because it shows that the sequence is now addressing perspective as well as circumstance. The movement from the wilderness to Horeb and from exhaustion to provision has brought Elijah to a point where the next phase will not be defined by external conflict, but by clarification. The journey has been sustained. The destination has been reached. And now, the sequence prepares for direct response. With Elisha now at Horeb, positioned in isolation within the cave and having expressed his understanding of the situation, the sequence moves into a moment of direct response. Up to this point, Elijah has described his perspective as continued alignment with the established authority, the opposition he has faced, and his conclusion that he remains alone. This matters because it defines the internal framework from which he is operating. What follows will address that framework directly. Elijah is instructed to go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. This instruction is simple, but it initiates a shift from the enclosed space of the cave to an open position where observation can take place. As he stands there, a series of events occurs. First, a strong wind passes by, powerful enough to break rocks apart. Then an earthquake follows, and after that, a fire. Each of these events is significant in scale and impact, representing forces that are clearly observable and difficult to ignore. However, the sequence makes a specific distinction. None of these events are identified as the point of response. After these events, there is a different kind of occurrence, a low, quiet sound. This is not described in the same way as the wind, earthquake, or fire. it does not carry the same visible force or disruption. When Elijah perceives this, he covers his face and moves to the entrance of the cave. This reaction indicates recognition. The response is not tied to the larger, more dramatic events, but to this quieter moment. This matters because it establishes that the response does not follow the pattern of visible intensity that might have been expected based on previous experiences. The question is then presented again. What are you doing here, Elijah? The repetition of the question is important. It provides an opportunity for Elijah to respond once more, and he gives the same answer as before. This consistency shows that his internal understanding has not changed simply by observing the sequence of events on the mountain. This matters because it highlights the need for direct clarification rather than indirect implication. Following this, Elijah is given a set of instructions. He is told to return by the way he came and to carry out specific actions, including anointing individuals who will assume roles of leadership and authority. These instructions are structured and detailed. They introduce a continuation of the sequence beyond the current moment, extending into future events that will unfold in alignment with what has already been established. This matters because it shows that the sequence is not ending at Horeb. It is being redirected. Elijah is also given information that directly addresses his earlier statement about being alone. He is told that there are other 7,000 individuals who have not aligned with the system he opposed. This information corrects his perception. The situation is not as isolated as he believed. This matters because it reframes his understanding of the environment and his role within it. At this point, the sequence has moved from confrontation to withdrawal to intervention, and now to clarification and redirection. The threat that initiated Elijah's movement led to isolation, but that isolation has resulted in instruction and renewed direction. The progression is consistent. Each stage leads into the next without interruption. Elijah leaves Horeb with defined purpose. The events on Mount Carmel remain established, the drought has ended, and the opposition has been addressed. But the sequence continues beyond those outcomes. What follows will involve new actions, new individuals, and the extension of what has already begun. The mountain of confrontation revealed authority. The wilderness revealed condition, and Horeb has now defined the direction forward. With the instruction given at Horeb and the direction clearly established, the sequence resumes movement. Elijah does not remain in isolation or delay his response. Instead, he leaves the mountain and begins to act according to what was defined. This matters because the clarification received is not presented as a conclusion, but as a starting point for the next phase. The sequence continues through action, not reflection. Elijah returns along the path indicated, moving back into the regions where the previous events had taken place. This return is significant because it marks a re-entry into the environment from which he had withdrawn. However, the conditions are no longer the same. The confrontation on Mount Carmel has already occurred. The prophets of Baal have been removed, and the drought has ended. This matters because the return does not repeat the previous phase. It builds upon what has already been established. One of the first actions Elijah takes is to locate Elisha, the individual identified in the instruction, as part of the next stage. Elisha is found working in the field, actively engaged in his task. This detail is important because it shows that the transition does not begin within a formal or ceremonial setting. It begins with an ordinary activity. This matters because it reflects the pattern already seen in the sequence. Key transitions occur within real conditions, not isolated environments. Elijah approaches Elisha and places his cloak over him. This action is direct and does not involve extended explanation. The act itself carries meaning, indicating a transfer or initiation of role. This matters because it introduces continuity. The authority that has been demonstrated and carried by Elijah will not remain limited to him alone. It will extend beyond him through defined individuals. Elisha responds by leaving what he was doing and following Elijah. This response is immediate and decisive. There is no delay or negotiation. He recognizes the significance of the action and aligns himself with it. This matters because it shows that the transition is accepted without resistance, allowing the sequence to move forward without interruption. Before fully leaving, Elisha returns briefly to conclude his previous responsibilities. He sacrifices the oxen and uses the equipment associated with his work to prepare a meal, which he shares with others. This step marks a clear separation from his previous role. It is not an incomplete departure. It is a defined transition. This matters because it shows that the sequence does not leave previous stages unresolved. It moves forward with clear boundaries between what was and what will be. After this, Elisha follows Elisha and begins to assist him. This establishes the beginning of a new dynamic within the sequence. Elijah is no longer operating entirely alone. The role that was previously singular now begins to expand. This matters because it reflects the instruction given at Horeb. What follows will involve multiple individuals carrying forward the progression. At this point, the sequence has moved from confrontation to continuation. The authority demonstrated on Mount Carmel and clarified at Horeb is now being extended into the next phase through new assignments and relationships. The movement has resumed. The direction has been defined, and the next stage will begin to show how these assignments unfold within the broader structure. With Elisha now returned from Horeb and Elisha beginning to accompany him, the sequence expands again beyond individual movement and into the broader structure of leadership. Up to this point, the focus is alternated between public confrontation and personal transition, but the events on Mount Carmel have already altered the balance within the kingdom. This matters because the next phase will begin to reflect those changes at the level of political and military activity. King Ahab remains in position as ruler, and the structure of leadership has not been replaced. However, the environment surrounding that leadership has shifted. The prophets of Baal, who were previously supported within the royal system, are no longer present, and the drought that had defined the land has ended. These changes affect the stability and perception of authority. This matters because leadership does not operate in isolation. It is influenced by the conditions and events that surround it. At this stage, external pressure begins to emerge. A coalition led by Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathers forces against Israel. This is not a minor conflict or localized dispute. It involves multiple kings and a coordinated military effort. The scale of the opposition introduces a new dimension into the sequence. This matters because the events are no longer limited to internal alignment or religious structure. They now extend into national security and survival. Ben-Hadad sends a message to Ahab, demanding submission and control over resources, including wealth and people. The demand is structured as a condition of avoidance of conflict. Ahab initially responds by agreeing to the terms, acknowledging the request without resistance. This reaction is important because it reflects a position of weakness or caution. Despite what has already taken place on Mount Carmel, Ahab does not immediately act with confidence in the face of this external threat. This matters because it shows that the internal shift has not yet fully translated into external posture. However, the situation develops further. Additional demands are made, extending beyond what was initially agreed. At this point, Ahab consults with the elders of the land. This introduces a collective element into the decision-making process. The elders advise against accepting the expanded demands, recognizing that the request exceeds reasonable terms. This matters because it marks a shift from individual reaction to structured response. The leadership begins to operate with broader input rather than isolated decision. Following this, Ahab rejects the additional demands, and the sequence moves toward confrontation. Ben-Hadad prepares for battle, expecting a decisive outcome based on the scale of his forces. The positioning is clear. One side holds a numerical advantage in coordination, while the other prepares under pressure. This matters because it sets the stage for another moment where outcome will not depend solely on visible strength. At this point, a prophet approaches Ahab with a message. The content is direct. Despite the apparent imbalance, the outcome of the battle will demonstrate where authority lies. This introduction is important because it connects the upcoming event to the pattern already established. previous outcomes were not determined by numbers or external strength, but by response tied to authority. This matters because it indicates that the next phase will follow the same underlying structure. The battle that follows is not described as prolonged or uncertain. Israel engages and achieves victory, despite the conditions that would have suggested otherwise. This result reinforces the pattern that has been developing throughout the sequence. External appearance does not define outcome. The result is tied to something beyond visible advantage. At these stages, the balance of power continues to shift. The internal confrontation on Mount Carmel has led into external outcomes that reflect the same pattern. The sequence is expanding, moving from demonstration to broader application. The next phase will not repeat what has already occurred. It will continue to build on it, showing how the sequence extends beyond a single moment into ongoing structure. After the initial confrontation with the forces of Aram results in an unexpected outcome, the sequence does not conclude that phase immediately. Instead, it introduces a second cycle of conflict, reinforcing the pattern that has already been established. This matters because a single event could be interpreted as situational, but repetition removes that possibility and confirms consistency within the sequence. Following the first defeat, the advisors of Ben-Hadad reassess the situation. They conclude that the outcome may have been influenced by location rather than authority, suggesting that the previous engagement favored Israel because it occurred in the hills. Based on this reasoning, they propose a new strategy and engage Israel again, but this time on the plains, where they believe the advantage will shift. This matters because it introduces an alternative explanation for the previous result, attempting to attribute it to environment rather than underlying cause. The forces are reorganized, and the second confrontation is prepared with deliberate adjustments. The kings who had previously been part of the coalition are replaced with appointed commanders, and the army is restructured to match Israel in number. This reconfiguration is not random. It is designed to eliminate variables that could be blamed for the earlier defeat. This matters because it sets the conditions for a controlled comparison. If the outcome changes, the explanation may hold. If it does not, the pattern becomes clear. As the two sides position themselves, the contrast between them is emphasized. The forces of Aram cover the land in large numbers, while Israel appears comparatively small. This visual difference reinforces the expectation of outcome based on conventional assessment. This matters because it highlights the same tension that has appeared in previous stages, visible imbalance between opposing sides. At this point, a prophet again approaches Ahab with a message that directly addresses the reasoning of the opposing side. The message states that the outcome of the coming battle will demonstrate that authority is not limited by location. This is a direct response to the assumption that had been made. This matters because it connects the upcoming event to the explanation that had been proposed, ensuring that the result will address that explanation directly. The battle takes place, and once again, the outcome follows the established pattern. Israel prevails, despite the conditions that would suggest otherwise. The scale of the result is emphasized, showing that the difference in numbers does not determine the outcome. This matters because it confirms that the previous victory was not situational or accidental. It was consistent with the underlying structure that has been unfolding throughout the sequence. Following the defeat, Ben-Hadad attempts to preserve his position through negotiation. He approaches Ahab seeking mercy, presenting himself in a submissive posture. Ahab responds by sparing him and establishing an agreement. This decision introduces a deviation within the sequence. Up to this point, actions have aligned with the pattern established through instruction and demonstration. This response, however, reflects personal judgment rather than adherence to the established direction. This deviation is addressed immediately. A prophet delivers a message indicating that the decision to spare Ben-Hadad does not align with what was expected within the sequence. The consequence is defined clearly because the action did not follow the established pattern. The outcome will reflect that deviation. This matters because it reinforces that the sequence is not only about victory or outcome, but about alignment with instruction. At this stage, the repetition of conflict has confirmed the pattern beyond a single event. The explanation, based on environment, has been addressed and dismissed through outcome, and the importance of alignment within the sequence has been reinforced through consequence. The sequence continues to expand, and the next phase will not focus on external conflict alone. It will move into the internal structure of decision and responsibility. With the second conflict resolved, and the pattern of outcome clearly established, the sequence shifts from external confrontation to internal accountability. Up to this point, the events have demonstrated that visible strength does not determine results, and that authority operates independently of location or scale. However, the decision made by Ahab to spare Ben-Hadad introduces a break in alignment that now becomes the focus. This matters because the sequence is not governed only by outcome, but by adherence to instruction within that outcome. After the agreement between Ahab and Ben-Hadad is made, a prophet is instructed to initiate a demonstration that will reveal the consequence of this decision. The method is indirect, but structured. One individual is told to strike another as part of the setup, but when he refuses, he is immediately judged for not following the instruction given. This initial action establishes a pattern what is commanded is expected to be carried out without alteration. This matters because it prepares the context for what will follow, showing that deviation from instruction carries immediate consequence. The prophet then approaches Ahab in disguise, presenting a situation that appears unrelated to the earlier decision. He describes being entrusted with a prisoner during battle, with the condition that if the prisoner were lost, there would be a defined consequence. He then states that, through distraction, the prisoner escaped. This scenario is carefully constructed. It mirrors the situation that has just occurred, but without directly referencing it. This matters because it allows Ahab to respond without immediate awareness that he is evaluating his own action. Ahab responds by declaring the expected consequence that the one who allowed the prisoner to escape is responsible and must bear the outcome. This judgment is given clearly and without hesitation. It reflects a standard of accountability that Ahab recognizes and applies when assessing another situation. This matters because it reveals his understanding of responsibility within the structure of command. At that moment, the prophet reveals his identity and removes the disguise, making the connection explicit. The situation that had been described is directly aligned with Ahab's own decision. By sparing Ben-Hadad, Ahab had allowed someone to remain who was not intended to be preserved within the sequence. The consequence that Ahab had just pronounced now applies to his own action. This matters because it removes any separation between judgment and responsibility. The standard he applied to another is now applied to himself. The message is delivered directly. Because of the decision made, the outcome will reflect that deviation. This introduces a shift in the sequence. Up to this point, the progression had been marked by demonstration, confirmation, and victory. Now, the focus includes consequence tied to personal decision within that framework. This matters because it shows that authority does not eliminate accountability. Instead, it reinforces it. Ahab returns to his house in Samaria, described as troubled and displeased. This reaction reflects the weight of what has just been revealed. The earlier victories remain unchanged, but the outcome of his decision now carries forward into the sequence. This matters because it shows that events do not exist in isolation. Actions taken within one moment influence what follows. At this day, study sequence has expanded beyond confrontation and confirmation into responsibility and consequence. The authority demonstrated on Mount Carmel continues to define outcomes, but individual decisions within that structure now shape the direction of what comes next. With the consequences of Ahab's earlier decision now established, the sequence moves into a different type of conflict, one that does not begin with external pressure or public confrontation, but with personal desire. This shift is important because it shows how the progression continues not only through large-scale events, but also through individual choices that affect others directly. The next phase begins with a request that appears simple, but carries implications that extend far beyond its initial form. Ahab observes a vineyard belonging to Naboth, located near his palace in Jezebel. The proximity is significant because it makes the vineyard desirable for expansion or personal use. Ahab approaches Naboth with a proposal, offering either a better vineyard in exchange or payment equivalent to its value. The request is presented as reasonable and negotiable. This matters because it establishes that the initial interaction is not coercive. It allows for voluntary agreement. Naboth responds by refusing the offer, stating that he cannot give up the inheritance of his fathers. This response is not based on price or preference. It is tied to principle and continuity. The land is not viewed as a transferable possession, but as part of an established inheritance that is not to be relinquished. This matters because it introduces a boundary that is not negotiable within the framework. Naboth follows. Ahab returns to his house displeased and unwilling to engage further with the situation. His reaction is not expressed through action at this point, but through withdrawal. He lies down, turns his face away, and refuses to eat. This behavior reflects dissatisfaction, but also a lack of resolution. This matters because it creates a condition where the situation remains open, allowing for external influence to enter. Jezebel observes Ahab's condition and asks him about the cause of his response. When he explains the situation, including Naboth's refusal, Jezebel interprets it differently. Instead of recognizing the boundary expressed by Naboth, she focuses on Ahab's position as king. Her response reframes the situation not as a request that has been declined, but as an opportunity to assert authority. This matters because it introduces a shift in approach, moving from voluntary exchange to enforced outcome. Jezebel tells Ahab that she will obtain the vineyard for him. This statement is direct and indicates that action will be taken without further negotiation. Ahab does not intervene or oppose this plan. His earlier withdrawal transitions into passive acceptance. This matters because it allows the next steps to proceed without resistance from the one who initially made the request. At this stage, the sequence has moved from desire to intention, and from intention to the beginning of action. What began as a request based on exchange is now being redirected into a process that will bypass that structure entirely. The boundary established by Naboth will not be addressed through agreement, but through a different method. The situation is no longer unresolved. It is being acted upon, and the next steps will reveal how authority can be used to override what was previously refused. With the intention now clearly defined by Jezebel, the sequence moves into execution. What began as a declined request is no longer treated as a matter of negotiation. Instead, a structured plan is put in place to produce the desired outcome through indirect means. This matters because the method used will bypass the boundary that Naboth had established, not by confronting it, but by removing it entirely. Jezebel writes letters in Ahab's name, using his seal to give them authority. The use of the king's name and seal is significant because it ensures that the instructions will be recognized as official. This matters because the plan does not operate outside the structure of leadership. It uses that structure to carry out its objective. The letters are sent to the elders and leaders of the city where Naboth lives, individuals who hold responsibility within the local governance system. The instructions within the letters are specific. A fast is to be proclaimed, creating a setting that appears formal and serious. Naboth is to be placed in a prominent position among the people, ensuring visibility. This setup is important because it establishes the context in which the next step will occur. The process is designed to appear legitimate and structured, not arbitrary or hidden. Two individuals are then to be brought forward to accuse Naboth publicly. The charge is that he has spoken against both God and the king. This accusation is severe and carries defined consequences within the structure of the law. This matters because the plan relies on the appearance of justice. The outcome is determined in advance, but it is carried out through a process that mimics legal procedure. The leaders of the city follow these instructions exactly. They organize the fast, position Naboth as directed, and bring forward the witnesses who present the accusation. The process unfolds in public, giving the appearance of legitimacy. This matters because it ensures that the result will be accepted within the structure of the community, even though the foundation of the accusation is false. Following the accusation, Naboth is taken outside the city and executed by stoning. The action is carried out in accordance with the charge that has been presented. The removal is immediate and final. This matters because it achieves the objective of the plan. The boundary that had prevented the transfer of the vineyard is no longer present. Once the execution is complete, a message is sent back to Jezebel, confirming that Naboth is dead. The communication is brief and direct, indicating that the plan has been carried out successfully. This matters because it marks the transition from execution to outcome. The process has achieved its intended result. Jezebel then informs Ahab that he can now take possession of the vineyard, stating that Naboth is no longer alive. The language used is straightforward, presenting the situation as resolved. Ahab responds by going to the vineyard to take ownership. There is no recorded hesitation or inquiry into how the situation was resolved. This matters because it shows acceptance of the outcome without examination of the process that produced it. At this stage, the sequence has moved from desire to action, and from action to acquisition. The vineyard, which had been refused through legitimate means, has now been obtained through manipulation of authority and misuse of process. The structure of leadership has been used not to uphold boundaries, but to remove them. The objective has been achieved, but the sequence does not end with possession. It now shifts to consequence. With the vineyard now taken and the objective achieved through manipulated authority, the sequence shifts immediately into confrontation. The acquisition has been completed, but the method by which it was obtained has not been addressed within the structure of accountability. This matters because the sequence does not end at possession. It moves forward to evaluate how that possession was gained and what follows from it. As Ahab goes down to take ownership of the vineyard, Elisha is instructed to meet him there. This location is significant. The confrontation does not occur in a neutral or distant setting. It takes place at the exact point where the outcome of the plan is being realized. This matters because it directly connects the consequence to the action. The setting itself becomes part of the message. When Ahab sees Elijah, the interaction begins immediately. Ahab recognizes him and frames the encounter as adversarial, asking if Elijah has come as his enemy. This response reflects the established pattern in previous interactions, where Elijah is associated with disruption or challenge. This matters because it shows that Ahab's perspective has not shifted. Even after the events on Mount Carmel and the subsequent developments, he continues to view Elijah as an opposing force. Elijah responds by identifying the situation clearly. He states that Ahab has acted in a way that aligns with wrongdoing, specifically by taking possession through means that violated established boundaries. The accusation is direct and not framed as interpretation. It defines the action and connects it to its underlying nature. This matters because it removes ambiguity. The issue is not the possession itself, but how it was obtained. The message then moves into declared consequence. Elijah states that the outcome of this action will extend beyond the immediate situation. The consequence is described in terms that affect Ahab's household and legacy. This is not limited to personal outcome. It impacts the broader structure connected to him. This matters because it shows that the action is not isolated. It produces effects that extend through the system of leadership. Specific details are given, including the removal of those associated with Ahab's line and the dismantling of his household. The language used is precise and structured, indicating that the consequence is defined and not subject to change. This matters because it reinforces the pattern seen throughout the sequence. Actions lead to outcomes that are consistent and measurable. Jezebel is also addressed within the message. The consequence connected to her role in the situation is stated directly, reflecting her involvement in initiating and executing the plan. This matters because it shows that responsibility is not limited to a single individual. Those who participated in the process are included in the outcome. At this point, the sequence has moved from hidden manipulation to full exposure. What was carried out through letters, false witnesses, and structured appearance of legality is now brought into direct clarity. The confrontation does not rely on evidence being presented. It speaks with authority about what has occurred. This matters because it confirms that the process cannot remain concealed within the structure that carried it out. The vineyard, which had been obtained through misuse of authority, is now the setting where that misuse is addressed. The outcome that seemed resolved is now redefined by the consequence attached to it. The action has been exposed, the consequence has been declared, and the sequence now moves toward response. With the confrontation complete and the consequence clearly declared, the sequence moves into its next phase. Response. Up to this point, the pattern has been consistent action, followed by exposure, and exposure followed by defined outcome. However, what follows introduces a variation within that pattern. The response given after the declaration does not remove the consequence, but it affects how and when it will unfold. This matters because it shows that the sequence allows for response to influence timing, even when the outcome itself remains unchanged. When Ahab hears the message delivered by Elijah, his reaction is immediate and visible. He tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth, and fasts. These actions are not presented as symbolic gestures. Without meaning, they represent a clear acknowledgement of the situation and a shift in posture. Unlike earlier moments in the sequence, where Ahab responded with resistance, dismissal, or passive acceptance, this response reflects recognition of the weight of what has been declared. This matters because it marks a change in behavior that had not been present before. Ahab's actions continue beyond a single moment. He moves about in a subdued manner, maintaining the posture he has adopted. This sustained response is important because it indicates that the reaction is not temporary or superficial. It is consistent over time. This matters because it distinguishes between immediate reaction and continued alignment in response to what has been revealed. At this point, a message is given to Elijah regarding Ahab's response. The observation is made that Ahab has humbled himself. This recognition is not based on verbal declaration, but on visible action. This matters because it confirms that the response has been observed and evaluated within the structure of the sequence. Following this, the timing of the previously declared consequence is addressed. The outcome that had been defined will still occur, but it will not take place during Ahab's lifetime. Instead, it will be carried forward into the next generation. This adjustment is specific. It does not remove or reduce the consequence, it alters when it will be fulfilled. This matters because it shows that response can influence timing without changing the established result. This moment introduces a layered understanding within the sequence. The structure remains consistent. Actions lead to outcomes, but the progression includes the possibility that the unfolding of those outcomes may be affected by a subsequent response. This does not create uncertainty within the sequence. Instead, it adds dimension, showing that the process is not rigid in timing, even though it is fixed in direction. At this stage, the sequence has moved from desire to manipulation, from manipulation to exposure, and from exposure to declared consequence. Now, it includes response that modifies how that consequence will be experienced. The vineyard remains in Ahab's possession, but the outcome attached to its acquisition has not been removed. It remains defined, waiting to unfold according to the adjusted timing. The immediate conflict has been addressed. The misuse of authority has been exposed, and the response has introduced a shift not in what will happen, but in when it will occur. The sequence now carries forward with that condition in place. With the consequence defined and its timing adjusted, the sequence moves forward into its final phase. Up to this point, the progression has included confrontation, demonstration, internal conflict, and exposure of misuse of authority. Now, the events begin to converge again around external conflict, but this time with conditions that have already been established by what came before. This matters because the next actions will not occur in isolations. They will unfold within the framework already defined by prior decisions and declared outcomes. After a period without conflict between Israel and Aram, a new situation arises involving the territory of Aram. The location becomes the focus of attention, not as a symbolic point, but as a strategic position that remains under the control of Aram. Ahab identifies this and raises the question of whether action should be taken to reclaim it. This introduces the possibility of renewed engagement, but unlike previous confrontations, this decision will involve consultation before action is taken. Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, is present with Ahab at this time. This introduces a second leadership perspective into the decision-making process. Jehoshaphat agrees to support Ahab in the potential conflict, but he adds a condition. He requests that they first seek guidance before proceeding. This matters because it introduces a step that was not consistently present in earlier decisions. The sequence now includes inquiry before action. Ahab gathers prophets to provide an answer regarding the proposed action. The number is large, and they respond with a unified message, indicating that the outcome will be favorable. This response appears clear and supportive of the decision to go to war. However, Jehoshaphat questions whether there is another source to consult. This hesitation is important because it introduces doubt regarding the uniform response that has been given. Ahab acknowledges that there is another prophet, Micaiah, but states that he does not favor him because his messages are not positive. This admission reveals a preference for responses that align with expectation rather than those that reflect accuracy. This matters because it shows that the process of seeking guidance can be influenced by personal bias. This Pitatis Micaiah is called and brought forward. Before he arrives, the messenger instructs him to align his message with the others, indicating that agreement is expected. This sets up a contrast between expectation and actual response. This matters because it introduces tension into the sequence. What will be said may not align with what is desired. When Micaiah speaks, he initially reflects the same message as the others, but his tone prompts Ahab to demand a truthful answer. Micaiah then describes a different outcome, indicating that the battle will not result in success and that the forces will be scattered. This message directly contradicts the earlier consensus. This matters because it introduces a clear division between agreement and accuracy. Micaiah also describes the process behind the earlier messages, indicating that the unified response of the other prophets does not originate from a reliable source. This explanation challenges the validity of the guidance that had been given. This matters because it reframes the decision point. The information available is no longer consistent, and the responsibility now rests on which message will be followed. At this stage, the sequence has returned to a moment of decision under conflicting input. The pattern established earlier alignment with instruction leading to defined outcome is now presented again, but within a context where the correct path is clearly stated and can either be followed or ignored. The decision has not yet been made, but the consequences already been defined, and what follows will depend on the choice that is taken. With the conflicting messages now clearly presented, the sequence moves into decision. Ahab has received both confirmation from the majority of prophets and a direct warning from Micaiah that the outcome will not be favorable. The information is no longer uncertain or incomplete. Both possibilities have been stated, and the responsibility now lies in which message will be followed. This matters because the next step will not be based on lack of knowledge, but on choice in the presence of clear instruction. Despite the warning given, Ahab chooses to proceed with the plan to go to battle at Ramoth. This decision aligns with the earlier pattern seen in previous stages of the sequence, where personal preference influences action, even when contrary instruction is present. This matters because it reinforces consistency in behavior. The sequence is not introducing a new pattern, it is continuing one that has already been established. Before entering the battle, Ahab makes a strategic adjustment. He chooses to disguise himself, while Jehoshaphat goes into battle wearing his royal robes. This decision introduces a layer of precaution. Ahab is aware of the potential risk and takes steps to avoid being identified. This matters because it shows that the warning given has been acknowledged at some level, even if it has not been followed in decision. The attempt to reduce personal risk does not change the overall direction of the action, but it reveals awareness of consequence. On the opposing side, the king of Aram gives specific instructions to his commanders. They are told not to engage with smaller targets, but to focus exclusively on the king of Israel. This directive narrows the objective of the battle. It is not a general engagement. It is target. This matters because it aligns directly with the warning that had been given. The focus of the conflict is not distributed. It is concentrated. As the battle begins, the commanders of Aram identify Jehoshaphat, who is visibly dressed as a king, and move toward him. This creates a moment where the appearance of identity directs the course of action. Jehoshaphat cries out, and the commanders realize that he is not the king of Israel. They withdraw from pursuing him. This matters because it shows that the initial strategy of disguise alters the immediate direction of the encounter, but does not resolve the underlying condition. At these points, the sequence introduces a moment that appears incidental but carries direct consequence. A certain soldier draws his bow and fires an arrow without a specific target in mind. The action is not described as intentional toward a particular individual. However, the arrow strikes Ahab in a vulnerable area between sections of his armor. This detail is precise. It shows that the protection he had relied upon is not sufficient to prevent the outcome. Ahab is wounded and instructs his chariot driver to withdraw from the battle due to the severity of the injury. However, he remains in the chariot facing the battle as the day continues. Blood from the wound accumulates within the chariot, and by evening, he dies. The progression from injury to death is direct and uninterrupted. This matters because it confirms the outcome that had been declared earlier. The attempt to avoid identification and reduce risk does not alter the result. The army, seeing the king has fallen, disperses. The structure of the battle collapses as leadership is removed. This aligns with the message that had been given by Micaiah that the people would be scattered without a leader. This matters because it completes the pattern. The warning is not only accurate, it is fulfilled in detail. At this stage, the decision has been made, the action has been taken, and the outcome has occurred. The sequence has followed the path defined by the choice to proceed despite clear instruction. The battle has ended, the warning has been fulfilled, and the consequence has now taken place. With the battle concluded and Ahab's death established, the sequence does not move immediately into closure. Instead, it provides confirmation that what has occurred aligns precisely with what had been declared earlier. This matters because the progression is not only about events happening, but about those events matching what was previously defined within the sequence. After Ahab dies, his body is taken back to Samaria. The movement from the battlefield to the city marks a transition from action to aftermath. This matters because it shifts the focus from the moment of conflict to the confirmation of its outcome within the broader structure of the kingdom. The king who had initiated the battle returns, not as a victor, but as a result of the decision that had been made. The chariot in which Ahab had been standing during the battle is washed in a pool in Samaria. Astis okostos, come and lick the blood that had accumulated in it. This detail is specific and directly connected to the earlier declaration delivered by Elijah following the events involving Naboth. The fulfillment is not general or symbolic, it corresponds to the previously stated outcome. This matters because it reinforces the consistency of the sequence. What was declared does not remain abstract, it becomes observable. The account then summarizes Ahab's reign, noting the actions and structures associated with his rule. This includes references to his building projects and the overall scope of his leadership. This summary does not alter the outcome that has already taken place. Instead, it places his reign within the context of what has just been fulfilled. This matters because it shows that the sequence evaluates not only isolated events, but the entirety of a period of leadership. Following this, the sequence continues through succession. Ahab's son takes his place as king, indicating that the structure of leadership remains, even though the individual has changed. However, the consequence declared earlier was not limited to Ahab alone. It extended to his household. This means that what has begun with Ahab's death will continue into what follows. This matters because it shows that the sequence does not end with a single outcome. It unfolds across multiple stages until the defined consequence is fully realized. At this point, the pattern established throughout the sequence remains consistent. Actions have led to outcomes, and those outcomes are being confirmed in alignment with prior declarations. The misuse of authority, the decisions made in conflict, and the responses given at each stage have all contributed to the result that is now being observed. The events surrounding Ahab's death are not presented as unexpected or disconnected. They are the continuation of a process that began earlier, moved through multiple phases, and has now reached a point of visible fulfillment. This matters because it ties the entire sequence together, showing that each stage has contributed to the final outcome. The battlefield has confirmed the warning. The return to Samaria has confirmed the declaration, and the sequence now moves toward its final stage, where what began will be fully completed. With the death of Ahab confirmed and the initial stage of consequence fulfilled, the sequence moves into its final phase. Up to this point, the progression has followed a consistent pattern: action, exposure, declaration, and outcome. However, the consequence that had been defined earlier was not limited to a single individual. It extended to the entire structure connected to Ahab's house. This matters because what has begun with his death must now continue until the full scope of that declaration is completed. As the sequence advances, the leadership of Israel passes to the next generation. But the condition attached to Ahab's household remains in effect. The change in position does not remove what has already been established. This matters because it reinforces that the sequence is not interrupted by succession. It continues through it, carrying forward the consequence that has been defined. Over time, the actions that follow begin to align with what had been declared. Those connected to Ahab's line are systematically removed, and the structure that had supported the misuse of authority is dismantled. This process is not presented as a single event, but as a series of outcomes that unfold in sequence. Each step contributes to the same result: the complete removal of what had been established under Ahab's leadership. This matters because it shows that the sequence does not rush to conclusion. It completes itself through successive fulfillment. Jezebel, whose role in initiating the events surrounding Naboth had been central, is also brought into this final stage. The consequence associated with her is carried out in a way that directly corresponds to what had been declared earlier. This alignment between declaration and outcome reinforces the structure that has been present throughout the entire progression. This matters because it confirms that no part of the sequence remains unresolved. At this point, the system that had been challenged on Mount Carmel, reinforced through later actions, and exposed through misuse of authority, has been fully removed. The leadership structure that supported it no longer exists in its previous form. The consequence has moved from declaration to full realization, completing the process that began earlier in the sequence. Looking back across the progression, each stage connects directly to the next. The drought established the initial condition. The confrontation on Mount Carmel demonstrated authority. The removal of the prophets addressed the opposing structure. The return of rain resolved the environmental pressure. The events at Horeb clarified direction. The actions involving Naboth exposed misuse of authority. The final conflict confirmed the outcome, and the continuation through Ahab's household completed the consequence. Nothing in the sequence stands alone. Each part leads into the next. Each action produces a defined result, and each result aligns with what had already been established. At these stages, the sequence reaches its conclusion. The events that began with a single declaration of drought have unfolded through multiple phases, each building upon the previous one, until the final outcome is fully realized. Fire fell, the rain returned, the authority was revealed, and the consequence was completed. Now, before we close, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is. That, and also, after following this entire sequence step by step, what moment stood out to you the most? This is the full progression of what happened from Mount Carmel to the final outcome presented step by step, exactly as it unfolds. And now the sequence is complete. After the sequence of confrontation, rain, threat, withdrawal, renewed instruction, abuse of authority, and final consequence is fully unfolded, the final act turns back to the larger meaning of what took place. Up to this point, the story has moved through specific events in a clear order, each one connected by cause and effect. Now, the question is no longer what happened next, but what the entire sequence established within the nation of Israel. This matters because Mount Carmel was not an isolated display of power. It was a public turning point that exposed a deeper conflict already shaping the identity of the people. At the beginning of the sequence, Israel was not simply suffering under drought. The nation was divided in loyalty. Ahab's leadership, reinforced by Jezebel, had allowed Baal worship to move into public life, altering the spiritual structure of the kingdom. The prophets of Baal were not marginal figures. They were supported within the national system, which meant the conflict on Mount Carmel was never just between Elijah and a group of religious opponents. It was a confrontation between the authority that had originally defined Israel and the authority that had been adopted in its place. This matters because the fire that fell from heaven answered more than a single prayer. It exposed which authority was actually active in the life of the nation. The structure of the event made that conclusion unavoidable. The people were gathered publicly. The prophets of Baal acted first and were given full opportunity to call, persist, intensify, and continue throughout the day. Their process was visible, extended, and unrestricted, yet it produced no response. Elijah then repaired the altar, prepared the offering, saturated it with water, and delivered a brief prayer. The response was immediate and total. The contrast was not subtle, symbolic, or dependent on interpretation. It was direct, measurable, and public. This matters because the event removed uncertainty. The people's earlier silence gave way to open acknowledgement because the demonstration left no neutral position. The return of rain reinforced the same conclusion. The drought had framed the entire confrontation from the beginning, especially because Baal was associated with fertility and rain. The fact that the rain returned only after the confrontation on Mount Carmel mattered at a national level. It showed that the condition of the land itself was tied to the authority Elijah represented, not to the system Ahab had promoted. The rain did not function as a separate miracle, disconnected from the fire. It completed the sequence. First, the authority was revealed. Then the environmental condition that had pressed the nation into crisis was resolved. At the same time, the later events show that public demonstration does not automatically produce lasting obedience in every level of society. The people responded immediately, but Jezebel did not. Ahab repeatedly moved between recognition, weakness, poor judgment, and delayed response. This matters because the sequence makes an important distinction. Truth can be revealed publicly, yet leadership can still resist its implications. Mount Carmel settled the question of authority, but it did not remove the need for continued response, accountability, and consequence. That is why the story continues past the mountain into Jezreel, the wilderness, Horeb, the vineyard of Naboth, and the battlefield at Ram. By the end of the broader sequence, what Mount Carmel changed was not merely the weather or the mood of the crowd. It re-established the authority that had been challenged, exposed the weakness of the system that had replaced it, and set into motion the consequences that would continue unfolding through the house of Ahab. The confrontation on the mountain became the center point from which the rest of the sequence can be understood. It did not stand alone. It defined everything that followed. When the full sequence is viewed from beginning to end, the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal is not only about one dramatic moment when fire fell from heaven. It is about a progression in which every stage leads to the next with clear consequence. The drought created pressure across the land. The confrontation on Mount Carmel brought the conflict into public view. The silence of Baal exposed the failure of the opposing system. The fire confirmed the authority Elijah represented. The rain ended the national crisis. The threat from Jezebel revealed that opposition still remained. The wilderness and Horeb clarified Elijah's condition and direction. The events surrounding Naboth exposed how deeply authority had been abused within the royal house, and the later battles and judgments completed the consequence already attached to that abuse. This matters because a story is strongest when seen as a full sequence rather than a single isolated miracle. One of the clearest features of the account is the contrast between human effort and actual response. The prophets of Baal spent hours calling, moving, shouting, and cutting themselves, yet nothing happened. Elijah rebuilt the altar, arranged the offering, added water, and prayed once. The answer came immediately. That contrast is central to the story, but it is not presented as mere spectacle. It establishes a principle within the narrative. Visible intensity does not create authority, and numerical advantage does not guarantee results. Throughout the entire sequence, that same pattern continues. Elijah stands alone before many. Israel defeats larger forces in battle. A king disguises himself to avoid a warning, yet the warning is still fulfilled. A vineyard is taken through manipulated authority, yet the consequence still reaches the ones responsible. Again and again, the story shows that the visible structure is not the final determining factor. What remains at the end is not uncertainty. The sequence closes with definition. The authority challenged on Mount Carmel is shown to be real. The system built around Baal, manipulation, and royal misuse is shown to be unstable and temporary. The household that resisted correction does not remain secure. And Elijah, who moved from confrontation to exhaustion to renewed direction, is shown not as an isolated figure acting on impulse, but as one positioned within a sequence larger than himself. This matters because the story does not end by glorifying a single man. It ends by showing that every action in the sequence pointed beyond the individual to the authority under which he acted. So when we return to the central image of the story, we return to it with the whole progression in view. One altar repaired, one offering soaked with water, one short prayer, and one immediate response seen by an entire nation. That moment did not remain on the mountain. It continued through the rain, through the reaction of the palace, through the wilderness, and through the consequences that unfolded afterward. It became the point at which the conflict was no longer hidden. Now, before we close, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is. There, and after following this entire sequence, step by step, which part stayed with you the most? The silence of Baal, the fire on the altar, the return of rain, or the consequences that came afterward? This is the full progression of the day. Fire fell from heaven, presented step by step, from the drought to the final outcome, as the account unfolds. And now, the sequence is complete.